Kol omer kra va'amar ma'ekra, kol habasar chatzir, v'chol chasto katzitz hasadeh, yavesh chatzir novel tzitz ki ruach Adonai nashva bo. Achen chatzir ha'am, yavesh chatzir novel tzitz udevar Eloheinu yakum li'olam. A voice says, cry out. But I ask, what shall I cry? All flesh is like grass, and all of its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, and the flower fades when a wind from God blows upon it. Surely, therefore, people are like grass. The grass withers, and the flower fades, but the word of God endures forever. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar bino deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinhaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'magle tzedek laman shemo. Gam ki elech b'geit salmavet, lo ira ra ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha, hema yinachamuni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He guides me on paths of righteousness. He revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod, they comfort me. You set a table in sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. Ellen, when you were 18 years old, you spent time in Israel on a kibbutz. You learned about the land, you learned Hebrew culture, and the history of the Jewish homeland. When your father was almost the identical age, when he was 19 years old, he was sent to Bergen-Belsen. When most people are teenagers, they are on teen tours and they're traveling abroad and they're planning college and they're dreaming dreams and they're plotting their future. Your dad was in slave labor camp and seeing people die and seeing family die in the darkest era of human history. And yet somehow he still held on to his dreams. He still had dreams. You and Margie and Stephanie, you had a childhood, you had an adolescence, you had teenage years. Your dad, as the eldest son, was forced to support the family when his mom died and his dad was going through a tough time. And while still in adolescence, he was working. And then years later, he was in the camps. And amazingly, through it all, your father, your grandfather, your brother had dreams. He held on to his dreams about a future and he lived to carry them out. Sid Simon lived life forward. He had his memories and would tell you about them if you asked. But he lived his life forward. His goal was to become an American, to become part of the American present and the American future. Lots of positive energy, lots of hard work. He was a character. He was a storyteller. He had lots of friends and contacts. It could be charming, could be funny. Became close to others in the building community, in the business community. He was building not only structures, he was trying to build a life for himself and his loved ones. You know, the whole Jewish Bible, the whole Jewish story is cast as a journey. It's the journey of the Jews into Egypt and out, the journey of the Jews into Babylonia and out. A journey is the Jewish metaphor, and a journey is Sidney Simon's life. It's the American journey, it's the immigrant journey, it's the Jewish journey. Out of oppression and into freedom, out of darkness and into light, starting at the bottom and reaching great heights, professionally and personally. I've heard it said that the strongest response that a survivor can have to the Holocaust, the strongest statement a survivor can make after enduring the Holocaust, is to have children. In response to a world that could leave them scarred and wounded and pessimistic and angry and without hope, to have a child, to have a family, to have a life, is to say, I still believe in the future. And he did. It really makes so much sense what you told me about your dad, that he was up on current events, he was up on politics, he loved being busy every day. Now, John, you said he wanted action. My grandfather wanted action. because he lived forward. He lived present and he lived forward. He lived in the now, not back then, but in the now. He was building a new world. It makes sense he wanted to fight for Israel at one point. It's funny, he didn't believe in God, but he wanted to fight for Israel. His mind was always working. His mind was always going. He was bursting with creativity. He pursued creativity in his work and in his ideas. Even the fact that he was always buying things, right? Buying something new, coats or suits, cars, clothing. He wanted to live now, today, and into the future. He knew deep down how fortunate he was to be alive. I know you had several trips back to the different people in the family, several trips back to his village, several times, his home village. But he lived forward. And when he chose a partner, he chose someone, your mother, who could in some ways better him. She smoothed him out. She filtered him. She refined him. She yelled at him when necessary. She gave him good advice. And she was a great balance to him. He respected her. They respected what they could do for each other and with each other. They created the home that all of you grew up in. She had had a traumatic time during the war. He would always claim that her experience was more severe than his. He wanted her to have a good life. He wanted to make her comfortable. Partners in dance and partners in life. I think the term we use, is generation gap, right? Generations sometimes have trouble communicating to each other because their experiences are so different, the generation gap. Their memories are different, their frame of reference is different. Your dad led a different life from yours. His memories and experience is different from yours. But he communicated with you. And how did he ever translate the full experience of the Nazi period to you? I don't know that he thought he could do that. Instead, he shared with you the values he learned, which is to live life today and in the future. He shared with you how to live life and love life and know that it's special. I know you said he got great confidence from his mother growing up, that she was a big fan of his. And I want to give condolences to Sophie, his sister. But I know he received great confidence from his mom. A parent's confidence in their child goes a long way. And I know he gave you all confidence that you could get out there into the world and be something and do something and create something like he did. Because all of you, in your own ways, you're confident and you're strong and you're articulate and you're proud. You're all very proud. He led by example and people loved him for it. He lived with a good name and he died with a good name. Ellen, I want to call you up to continue.
It sounds trite to say that our dad was small in stature, but a giant of a man. A kind, bright, courageous, fun, and interesting man, but sometimes the cliche just fits. I probably could sketch together a chronology of his remarkable life, but that would be a mistake. A few years back, his cardiologist moved, and we were referred to a new cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic. We went to the appointment, and the new doctor introduced himself and innocently but understandably said, "So, Mr. Simon, tell me about yourself." A half an hour later, we were on 1949. So let me try and briefly capture my dad by talking about some highlights and some of the characteristics that come to mind for me when I think of him. He was adventurous. Some of the adventures were voluntary, others were not. He was born and raised in Sapinka, a small fiddler-on-the-roof village in northern Romania, one of 7 children and the oldest son. He was the apple of his mother's eye, went to work to help support the family when he was young, very young, and had little formal education. They were very poor. There was little to no money for food or clothing. Though he loved and was devoted to his family, he always thought there must be more than this. The devout Orthodox way of life revolving around temple and going to shul never appealed to him or even made sense to him. He dreamed of leaving and finding a way to earn money in order to make a better life for his family. Those dreams did not come true in the way that he imagined. The Nazis in World War II forged that tragic path. He was liberated from Bergen-Belsen in 1945. He weighed 90 pounds. He had survived the Holocaust, and miraculously, so did 3 of his sisters, Rizy, Malchi, and Sasi. His older pregnant sister, Alta, and his brothers, Beryl and Anchi, and his father were killed. His mother died when he was a teenager, a separate, devastating event, all of which he suffered before the age of 20. And so after the war, new adventures began. He met our mother, another Holocaust survivor, and they married in 1947. They had no homes and nowhere to go. My mother's entire family was killed in concentration camps. The Iron Curtain was falling in Eastern Europe. They fled Romania, went to Budapest, went to Prague, fled Prague, went to Paris. Margie was born in 1948. The goal was to get to America. He was smart, he was strong, he was resourceful. He spoke six languages: Romanian, Hungarian, Czech, Russian, German, French, and he was a smuggler. The only thing that he could do to earn money to get to America. He smuggled goods and sold them on the black market in Europe. He smuggled people across borders to help them escape the communists. He told us of a story in which he impersonated a Russian officer in order to reunite a wife and children out of Czechoslovakia who had been separated from their father and husband when the communists closed the border. I think that he was caught a few times and escaped a few times, and that whole period of their lives from when they were liberated to when they finally arrived in America and what my mom and dad went through to get here is truly unimaginable and incomprehensible. They arrived in America in December of 1949, did not know English, very little money, no education, no skills, let's say no marketable skills. They came to America because, like other immigrants, they had family here, specifically 4 uncles with the last name of Simon. One of those uncles suggested 2 things. 1, that Sidney was a good name, and 2, that the building business was booming and it would be a good business to get into. So Moishe Shmuel became Sidney Simon, and Sidney Simon somehow managed to get a job as a bricklayer. He lied and told the foreman that he had been a bricklayer in Europe. He didn't know anything about laying brick. And he got fired, got another job, got fired again, and each time he learned a little more about laying brick, and he became a great bricklayer. A year later, he saved enough money for a truck and started his own business as a mason contractor. In 1952, the year I was born, the family moved from 117th and Union to Renford Road in South Euclid, the first house that my dad had built. 10 years later, we moved to our beautiful house in Shaker Heights. He was successful, to say the least. From bricklayer to mason contractor to building houses, apartment buildings, condominiums, shopping centers, office buildings, to real estate development in 4 states. And far more important than his success was the fact that he loved his work. He loved building, he loved creating, he loved waking up each day to a new challenge. He never even considered it work. He loved what he did. And he loved America. He was all things American. Early in those bricklaying days, he met Harry Ratner, and Harry took my dad under his wing and became like an older brother, father figure to my dad. He was thirsty to be all things American and to be assimilated and to learn everything there was to learn about our wonderful country, the country he adored. And Harry was his teacher. Football games, baseball games, trips to Las Vegas, and God knows what else. It was a wonderful and special relationship. And while he retained relationships with friends and family from Europe, He met in those early bricklaying days his American friends, other young men in the building business, Arnie King, Norm Adler, Milt Wolf, to name a few, with whom he remained as close friends and buddies throughout their entire lives. And the adventures continued. They were always going somewhere, we were always going somewhere. When I was 4, to Florida in a prop plane. My dad went to Cuba fishing with his friend and partner Joe Greenspan, to Europe and the new state of Israel in the 50s with my Aunt Celia and Uncle Al, builders conventions with their friends, New York City, Puerto Rico, Ohio, multiple road trips to Cedar Point, Florida, Bedford Springs, Conneaut, Toronto. It seemed like one adventure after another, often completely spontaneous, and that continued throughout his life. In 1973, with the emergence of détente, Americans were in a very regulated way permitted to travel to the USSR. Upon learning this, my father decided that he wanted to take us to Sapinka and to his old stopping grounds in Budapest and Prague. Of mandatory inclusion were Moscow and Leningrad. My mother wisely declined to join and stayed home with our baby sister Stephanie. And so my dad, Margie, and I were some of the first Americans to travel to the USSR. And that was quite the experience, particularly our visit to Sapinka, an 8-hour drive from Budapest, where my father was the first and only Jew the villagers had seen, since the Jewish residents of the village were all taken by the Hungarians to Nazi labor and concentration camps in 1944. It was quite the experience. After Prague and Budapest, it was on to Moscow. Everything was shocking. It was like another planet, gray, scary, and Gotham City-like. The hotel seemed more prison-like than hotel-like. They handed us each one towel for our communal bathroom and kept the key to our room. The sparse small rooms had a concrete floor and cots that were chained to the floor. Margie and I, whose experience with our parents in those years were along the lines of the El San Juan, the King David, the Eden Rock, and the Waldorf, were horrified. We were so worried about our dad and expressed our concerns. "Daddy, are you okay?" He looked up at us and our reaction and laughed and said, "I've seen worse." And he repeated that trip back to Sapinka and Eastern Europe 2 more times, once with Stephanie and some cousins, and then again when he was 83 and decided that his now adult grandchildren, John and Claudia, should experience Sapinka, Romania, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. In 2013, when he was 88, I told my dad that my husband Blaine and I were going to France in a couple of weeks, primarily to Normandy, and then to Rome with friends to celebrate Blaine's 60th birthday. He said, "That sounds great. I've always wanted to go to Normandy. I think I'll go too." And so he came, and we had a wonderful and memorable trip. 2 years post a quadruple bypass, 6 months post a kidney removal, poor vision for macular degeneration, and not very good hearing. He flew from Miami to Charles de Gaulle alone, where we picked him up and then toured France, including the arduous trek to Mont Saint-Michel with the 5 flights of stairs up to our hotel room. That was my dad. And for sure, as I continued to observe my father throughout his life and his reactions to various situations with which he was confronted, I can say that he was the most adaptable person I have ever encountered. And he always maintained an upbeat, positive attitude. He loved a good time. He loved to have fun. He loved a party. I felt like there was always a party going on or one in the works. On Renford, there were parties in the basement and picnics in the backyards. The South Woodland House was known for its parties. Any occasion my father could think of to have a party, large or small, he would. The large yard, the pool, the tents, my dad loved it all. And then a really big party emerged when he and my mom celebrated their 50th anniversary of coming to America with a grand party at the old courthouse. Black tie, 200 plus people, a 20-piece orchestra, and his very own Statue of Liberty. He could have celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary or their 75th birthdays, but instead he chose to celebrate what he considered to be the most single important event in his life, his arrival in America. He loved life and he loved America. He was uneducated but worldly, ignorant in many ways due to his limited, sheltered background, but intelligent and wise in most ways. He watched the news religiously and obsessively. He was devoted to civil rights, civil liberties, and Holocaust education. He knew and understood discrimination like few others. He cherished the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He cherished the freedom that he had and the freedom of his family. He abhorred bullies and those who were prejudiced. He was always for the underdog, the immigrant, the poor, the less privileged. He gave generously to the American Civil Liberties Union, the Anti-Defamation League, and Facing History. He was proud to have funded trips of students from Ohio and neighboring states to the Holocaust Museum through a program funded by the Anti-Defamation League. He was thrilled by the letters he received from those students and the impact that the visit to the Holocaust Museum had upon their lives. He was proud of his contribution to the important work done by Facing History and ourselves on Holocaust education in high schools throughout the country. He was a proud, patriotic American and knew the importance of protecting the principles that bind us together as a nation. And of course, anyone who knew my dad knew that he was fervently devoted to his family. There is nothing that my dad wouldn't do for his family, for my mother, to whom he was married for 57 years, and for his 3 daughters, with whom he indulged with an abundance of love, support, and generosity throughout our lives. Margie had the special relationship as the first child. I was for a long time the baby. I think a bit of a substitute for the son he never had. We rode horses together, went to all of the Browns games together, and he was so supportive of my work as a lawyer. Stephanie was born when Margie went to college and I started high school, and my parents were thrilled. Stephanie had my parents all to herself during her growing up, and they adored her. And the 3 of them had wonderful times and adventures together, and she most certainly kept my parents young. He loved kids. He was one of those people who loved kids. And of course, he had a very joyous and special love for his grandchildren, John, Claudia, and Jack. And much to his delight, his 5 great-grandchildren in these last years. Typical babysitting consisted of teaching them how to play gin and blackjack and gambling with pennies, building great complexes with Legos, and later enjoying golf with the 2 princes, John and Jack. And we all know that my dad was a far better gin player, his lifelong 3-day-a-week habit, than golf, what he called the great time killer, which he continued to play poorly 7 days a week through the age of 92. And he had the most special relationship with his devoted nephew, Bernie, who was not only a loving friend, but who became a wonderful business partner who kept my dad active, happy, and busy building in Florida during the last years of his life. And a true blessing beyond words is the day that our angels, Larry Diario and his wife, Monica, walked into my dad's life. Not only walked into his life, but moved from Florida to Sedona with him, along with their dog, Nacho. They have taken care of my father with true love, friendship, and devotion over the past 3 years, and I really cannot find the words to express the depth of appreciation and admiration that we have for them. We are eternally grateful. Overall, my dad was a great guy. Anyone I would meet who would learn that Sidney Simon was my father would inevitably say, your dad's a great guy, or I love your dad. And most important, I think what stands out the most for me was that my dad was a good person. No matter how wealthy or successful he became, he never forgot where he came from. He was the opposite of a snob. He had enormous empathy. He always tried to help people. He was a principled person. He was moral. And he did his best to pass on those principles to his children and grandchildren. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Yes, it's truly an amazing story. A Holocaust survivor who never wanted to be defined by that. A self-educated man who overcame the most horrendous adversities to achieve great success, not only in a material way, but more important, a fine person of whom we are so proud.
Margie?
Ellen, you did a great job. My name is Margie. I'm the oldest daughter. Charles Dickens opened up the book A Tale of Two Cities, which my father would never have heard of, with this line: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." My dad lived his life in total reverse. He lived through the darkest days of Europe in Auschwitz, and then came to the Golden Land, where he lived a full, rich, vibrant, amazing life, starting out as a bricklayer and later becoming a major real estate developer. Dad lived a big life. He was a major character, very smart, very hardworking, tough as nails, persevering in the face of obstacles, charming, a great storyteller, loved his horses, his card games, golf, which he played poorly, as Ellen mentioned, and he loved his family. He treated everyone the same, no matter their race, religion, or economic standing, unless, of course, you criticized him. Mom was the only one that could get away with that. You're laughing, you know. Dad was generous and lived with integrity. He would go to great means to achieve justice if he felt he was in the right. Just ask his lawyers in the room about that. Dad's love of country permeated our home. That's why we have the American flag up here today. We all watched and discussed the news around our dinner table every night for as long as I can remember. Of course, in those days, it was Walter Cronkite or Chet Huntley and David Brinkley at the 6 o'clock news hour. That's when I became a news junkie, which I still am today, although it's getting harder and harder to watch the news. Dad and Mom threw a party, which Ellen mentioned, to celebrate their 50th anniversary in America in 1999. It was quite a blowout party. When interviewed by the Plain Dealer, the headline read, "Free and Not Afraid," which, with a photo of my mother and father. Those were my mother's words, free and not afraid. We understood that our country offered people like my parents real freedom. This was just not a textbook phrase for our family. It was real. Refugees that flee from terror come here with such profound gratitude, like my parents, appreciate and love of our country. They are patriots. Many of us who were born here take this all for granted, acting as though things are settled. They are not settled. Dad taught us that each generation has to take responsibility for our democracy. Things can turn on a dime. That is what my parents taught us. So how did I translate what I learned from Dad into my own life. I became an activist during my college years, a history major, a summer intern for a U.S. senator. I worked professionally for a U.S. senator. I've remained active in politics, hosting fundraisers for senators and congressmen. I'm active in organizations that challenge bigotry, and I register voters right now. Dad was an amazing guy. He taught us so much about being a good human being. We're so profoundly to have had him as a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He shall always remain with all of us in spirit.
John.
Okay, it's a lot to Grandpa, so I had a little trouble organizing my thoughts, so I'm going to do my best here. So just want to thank Larry and Monica, as my mom did, and Nacho. My kids were very concerned about Nacho. Importantly, I want to thank my mom and Blaine, particularly these last couple of years. I just really appreciate everything they do for Grandpa. Okay, I was the first grandson. I had to say he was excited about my arrival would be the understatement of the century. I got absolute preferential treatment. It was remarkable how special he made me feel. Jack also, he was in the same boat as me when Jack came along. We could do no wrong in many ways, even though I know I did quite a bit of wrong growing up. My sister, I have felt bad a lot of the time. It was all acknowledged and everything, but she ultimately had the great equalizer here at the end when she, for one, picked up Grandma's cooking in a way nobody else could. She rose right back up to the top, and ultimately the trump card of having the first great grandson. We spent a lot of time together growing up, a lot, and it wasn't the type of relationship I guess that you would expect or see in TV and movies. He never really asked me about school or kind of the sports I did. He didn't show up to a lot of games I played in and didn't really care about friends or girlfriends, but we were together all the time. And I remember there was a specific moment in time where things switched from me being a kid and a grandson to us being best buds. And it was... I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was flying to Florida to go see Grandma and Grandpa. I can't imagine how many people on this trip have taken that trek from Cleveland to Florida. It seems like, probably everybody. I ended up sitting next to on the plane 2 guys who were on their way to Florida for a gambling trip to go to the races, to go to the horse track. I didn't really know much about it. We started talking, and on that flight, I don't know what happened, but I learned how to play gin from these 2 guys. And I got off the plane, and I got to tell my grandpa and grandma asked me how was the flight, how'd it go, and I told Grandpa I learned how to play gin. And I've never seen him light up like this. He was so excited, and it was a specific, everything kind of changed that day. It's crazy as it may seem. But then we started spending a lot of time together. We'd always go to the jobs. He'd say, let's go to the jobs. I'd skip school. One of the many things we had in common was neither of us were very motivated by academics. I skipped school and I would go with him to the jobs. And we'd go drive out wherever and go spend the day together and the whole thing. And I remember the first day I realized I think he may be nuts. And it wasn't, there was a specific thing. It was not when he realized that his caddy at Beachmont was also a Michael Jackson impersonator and had him show up at my house when I was 5 years old and knock on the door dressed as Michael Jackson. It was not that specific experience, but it was a specific day when I was about 11 or 12 years old. It was much like today. It was kind of rainy and a dreary day, and we did what we normally did. Wake up, go to Corky's, get breakfast, drive out to the jobs. It always felt like it was Copley. I don't know. I don't even know if Copley's really a place. We were always at Copley. we drive out in his big car. He's on his car phone the whole time. He loved his car phone. I mean, he always had the car phone. It was ridiculous. We get to this job. Grandpa went into the trunk. He always had boots in his trunk. He switched out of his loafers, put on his boots, and he started talking to this guy. And again, I just want to read it. I was about 11 or 12 years old at this time, towering over Grandpa at 5'5". I was maybe 100 pounds. And almost instantly, Grandpa just started screaming at this guy. I mean, screaming. And this guy's screaming back, and they are about to get in a fight. And I was scared to death. I didn't know what's going to happen. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I was so scared. And I remember it ended, and Grandpa stormed off, and we kind of followed him, and we got in the car, head back to headquarters for lunch, which is Corky's, obviously. And we didn't really talk much on the drive back, and we sat there, and we had lunch. And as we're walking out for lunch, that guy walked into Corky's. And I froze, and Grandpa froze, and the guy froze. Now, the guy wasn't huge. He was a normal-sized adult, but twice the size of Grandpa. And next thing I know, I look at Grandpa, and what does he do? He has the biggest smile. He starts laughing. He walks right up to the guy. This guy has the biggest smile, and they just hug in the middle of the Corky and Lenny's. And to me, to him, that was him. It was the smile. It was that personality. He could say whatever he wanted and completely get away from it. It could be get away with it. It was completely... He'd say some things that might be insensitive, or there really was no filter other than Grandma and Grandma's unique and incredible specific dirty look that she could give in a way I just can't describe it, usually followed by yelling at each other in some sort of hodgepodge secret language they had. But that was him. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and and his motivation, I always found, was pure. And I was always struck by, I know my mom and Margie kind of mentioned how hard he worked, how proud he was of his work, how he took he felt such pride in his accomplishments and the buildings he built, and I just found how much that inspired me in my own life and career as kind of an extension of him and his American dream. I find I have so much in common with him. I have 3 daughters. I eat at the Corky and Lenny's equivalent in Beverly Hills, next to my office, Nate and Al's, 4 to 5 times a week. I can't help myself. My hairline, my career in Hollywood is ultimately the extension of his American dream, and I think constantly how he would have succeeded in my business and the things that I learned from him along the way. It's a business of people faking it till they make it and just hustling people and action and all that, and how much he just would have loved it and would have thrived in it, and how much pride he would have taken in it. That being said, I know the thing that I think about as I was thinking about him a lot lately is it's really the little things. He had so many combs. It was inexplainable why he always had a comb, 15 combs. He had this insane, ultimately I found irresponsible wad of cash in his pocket at all times in case he found a gin game. It was crazy. He had, with the exception of Charles Barkley, the worst golf swing in the history of golf, which then led to a ridiculous amount of golf equipment that we refer to his basement as the Sid Simon Pro Shop. He'd buy 2 Cadillacs at a time. He drank coffee in such a specific way. He would get excited for a meal, literally any meal. You could tell him we're going to McDonald's. He loved it, and I'd never seen anybody get as excited for a meal. The jokes, a lot of them bad. There was a specific joke that my sister, you're more than welcome to ask her about, that took place at I think it was Samurai before Benihana, but at a Benihana table when we were kids. He loved Caddyshack, but even more Caddyshack 2 with Jackie Mason. He really identified with Jackie Mason in Caddyshack 2. He could talk about if he could right now, he would talk about my cousin Vinny to anybody that'll listen. He loved my cousin Vinny. The stories, incredible storyteller, and truthfully, I could go on and on. In talking to people this week after we found out that Grandpa had passed away, I got two great quotes from two of his son-in-laws. And having my own three daughters and imagining what it's like to be Sid Simon's, having him as a father-in-law, I couldn't imagine what that experience is like. My dad said he's finally gets to give God that deposition he's always been asking for. And as a guy who has never shied away from litigation, that made a lot of sense. And Blaine said he's in the big Jing game now, which I thought was really appropriate. So lucky that I got to know him, let alone be his grandson. We had a really special relationship. There'll never be anyone else like him. He was truly one of a kind.
Bernie?
Never give up, never surrender, always move forward. Words that were originally attributed to a famous World War II general, George Patton, one of Sidney's favorite people, in addition to Sid's lifelong direction, and one he used to live by each and every day. I don't remember if one of you guys told me that Patton, the movie Patton, was one of his favorites too. Yeah. April 15th, a day that most Americans dread. Not Sidney. He celebrated this day every year since his liberation. Uh-oh. See, that's what happens when you don't have paper. So you have to do it. Somebody said use your iPad. Okay, I'll start again. April 15th, a day that most Americans dread, not Sidney. He celebrated this day every year since liberation from death camps by General Patton's 3rd Army Group. During his 60-year career as one of Cleveland's premier real estate developers, he took the motto of never give up, never surrender to heart each day. With a career that long, it's impossible not to suffer the occasional setbacks. Everyone does. It's how you deal with the adversity that makes you stand out. When Sid ran into a difficult situation or a brick wall, he did not retreat. He attacked in a different direction. He would hire lawyers to help him manage difficult legal issues, and he used to say, and I cleaned this up because my mother's in the room, those effing lawyers, they're going to do what I tell them to do. And they always did. During his career, he was one of the first builders in the country to take his home building business public, something most companies try to do almost weekly today, except he did it in the mid-70s, a little more than 20 years after being liberated from the death camps. Also during his career, he built a precast concrete plant manufacturing precast concrete planks in Kent, Ohio, which is something that is used almost universally today in commercial and apartment building construction, except he did that in the 60s. In the mid-70s, when the women's liberation movement gained prominence, he was the first contractor in the country to hire a woman to work on one of his road crews as a laborer, then being interviewed by the national press and the evening news. I don't know how many of you guys remember that. These are just a few of the many, many accomplishments of Sid's long and very full and successful life. Coming from a small shtetl in Romania, no parents, and the horrific experience of surviving the death camps, Sidney Simon never gave up and never surrendered. I want to read a short email note I received from an attorney friend of his that was unable to attend today. I'm sorry I will miss Sid's funeral as I will be out of the country. For so many years, he was one of my favorite clients to work with. Every meeting and conversation were memorable, and I always appreciated his sharp intellect and positive outlook on life, even while facing challenging and difficult issues. His determination and willpower and ability to work through the most difficult obstacles and come out on top were truly remarkable. As Sidney's nephew, I spent many years of my career working for my uncle when I was younger, and the last almost 20 years as his partner. I learned very much from him through his stories and the time we would spend together either on the job or driving from Palm Beach out to the West Coast. And we both looked forward to spending time with each other. I will miss him very much, and so will many others.
Please rise now for the memorial prayer.
שוכן במרומים המצא מנחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת משה שמואל בן נתן וזיסו שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו בעל הרחמים אז תראהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן.
Let's be seated, everyone. We offer our condolences to the family, to Margie, to Ellen and Blaine, Stephanie and Chuck, the grandchildren John and Tracy, Claudia and Samuel and Jack, great-grandchildren Marley, Drew and Winnie, Sidney and Melody, sister Sophie. The family will be receiving friends for the visitation. The Shiva visitation will be at Lander Haven today following the burial portion of the service at Landerhaven today until 5 p.m. and also again this evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Tomorrow, Friday, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and Friday, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. So it's today until 5 and then again 7 to 9. Tomorrow, 1 to 4 p.m. and Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. and that's at Landerhaven in Mayfield Heights. Please rise. We're going to finish the service with God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my own sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home.
Let's be seated, everyone. Pallbearers should now come forward.